This is the Leica R 50mm f1.4. Made back in the 1980s, this lens can be had for upwards of $2,000. For a 40-year-old lens at this price point, the question becomes, is it worth it? And that's what we're going to try to answer here today. But first, if you're new to the channel, my name is Anson, and on this channel we talk about filmmaking, specifically budget gear, tutorials, and a look at the projects that I'm working on. And so if that's something you're into, consider subscribing. Like I said before, today we are talking about the Leica 50mm f1.4. Judging by the serial number, this lens was manufactured around 1982, and so for all intents and purposes, this lens is about 40 years old this year. So happy 40th birthday to this lens specifically, which is crazy. This lens is older than I am. Barely. We won't talk about it. And so for a 40-year-old lens, is a $2,000 50mm f1.4 worth it in 2022 when there's a lot of great modern options? And so to answer that question, we are going to break down the performance of this lens and the quality of this lens, as always, by image quality, build features, and my overall thoughts slash who I think would be useful for. And let's start with image quality. Now I'm going to go ahead and start with the fact that in the past couple weeks, I have tried to sell this lens 3 different times. And I say that not to say that I can't sell this lens because nobody wants it, but because I have taken it off the market 3 different times. Because every time I go to try to sell this lens for budgetary reasons, because obviously this is a $2,000 lens, I could probably put that into something else, but every time I go to try to sell this lens, I take it off the market because I watch content that I've shot with this lens. The image that you're going to get from this lens is almost like a perfect marriage of a clinically sharp and clean image mixed with this organic kind of more natural feel, and that is what summarizes the image you're going to get from this lens. And so again, that alone should be a selling point for the overall image performance of this lens. But let's talk about a couple of other things I really enjoy about the performance of the 50mm Summilux. The f1.4 offers a really good low light performance, but also offers some creative abilities to play around with the shallow depth of field of what's in focus, what's not in focus. And speaking of the not in focus areas, the bokeh on this lens is really pleasing. I find that with a lot of vintage lenses, the out of focus areas can get very busy and kind of distracting. And there are some instances where this lens does do that, but for the most part, you're going to get smooth and pleasing bokeh from this, again, 40-year-old lens, which is not necessarily a common thing with lenses from this era. Now, there are a couple negatives with this lens. One is that the chromatic aberration is definitely there. Now, this is something you should expect from vintage lenses. The coating is not really going to be the same as modern lenses that kind of do a better job of handling chromatic aberration. Another thing that really disappoints me and kind of just makes it a negative for this lens is the fact that the minimum focusing distance is not great. Beyond those 2 negatives, really and truthfully, if you're looking for an image that offers rich colors, just a really sharp image, but also kind of maintaining that organic and natural feel, this is absolutely a lens to consider. So the image of this lens is just amazing. So with that being said, let's go over and talk about the build features of this lens. Now, keep in mind, I have cine-modded this lens. I say it that way because I haven't changed out the mount and I haven't declicked the aperture, but I do have a follow focus gear on the lens, as well as a step-up ring, kind of like a cine style step-up ring. But that being said, the 50mm Summilux is a freaking miniature tank. That is something we come to expect about vintage lenses. The focus ring and how smooth that is all depends on the condition of the lens. So make sure if you are looking at this lens that you are reading conditions or asking questions from the seller if the focusing ring is smooth. Now, if you are planning on using step-up rings, I know my version is a 55mm filter thread. Depending on the age of your lens, it may be smaller, it may be larger, so just make sure. But mine is a 55mm, so if you are buying one from the 1982 time frame, that should be the filter thread that you're working with. Now, a negative that I have as far as the build features from this lens is the fact that when you're focusing, the barrel does extend and contract. Now, that's something that's common with vintage lenses, especially vintage lenses that are catering more to photography, but that is something you want to be aware of if you're using a matte box. But otherwise, like I said, this lens is a freaking tank. And so with that, let's go over and talk about my overall thoughts and maybe who I'd recommend it to. Now, overall thoughts, like I said before, this lens is again the perfect kind of combination of sharp, clean, but also giving you that more organic and natural look to your images. Normally when I sell a lens, it gets listed, I sell it, it's out of here, don't look back. This lens is one that I've had such a hard time trying to part ways with it that I finally just said, I'm just keeping it. I don't care if I have this much money tied up into one vintage lens. I'm keeping it because it is an amazing lens. And that again should be a testament of the performance and what I think about this lens. And so with that being said, who would I recommend this lens to? And I think that comes down to two categories of filmmakers. One category of filmmakers I would recommend this for are people that are looking for that clean and sharp image, but also again, that organic and natural feel. I would absolutely recommend this lens. And then the other group of people are filmmakers that are just building their Leica set and want a fast 50mm. Filmmakers that are currently building their Leica set will often go with the Summicron version of this lens, but I do know some people that rather have a really fast 50mm, and if that's you, then I would definitely look at this lens as well. And so again, if you fall into one of those two categories, I would 1000% check out the Leica R Summilux 50mm f1.4. And so that's it for me. I hope this video was helpful in giving you more information about this lens. If you do have any more questions, let me know in the comments below. If you did enjoy the video, make sure to give it a like, and if you're digging the overall content from the channel, consider subscribing. Thank you for joining. Go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Stay safe, be happy, support each other. Wash those hands, and I'll see you here next time. Peace.